It's been almost a year since I completed the Batwing to shark nose conversion of my wife's ultra-limited low. In this video, I'll give you an update on a couple of problems I had to solve and a couple of tips for working under the fairing. As you can imagine, the problems I had involved the wiring harness. A couple of times the voltmeter and the fuel gauge and the turn signal indicators stopped working. I traced the problem to poor connections. I hadn't double crimped the butt splice connectors. If you use these heat shrink wrapped butt splice connectors, be sure to double crimp each end. And I suggest that you not heat the heat shrink until after you've installed the harness and given it a test fit and made sure that everything is working. Wiggle the wires on each of the connectors to make sure that they are solidly crimped. After you're happy with it, that it works, then use your heat gun to shrink the heat shrink. When I removed the wiring harness to work on it, I found it was very difficult to remove the connectors from the voltmeter and the fuel gauge. So I made a tool to assist me in taking those connectors off. Let's look at that. I made this tool from a coat hanger. It's used to pull the connectors off the fuel gauge and the voltmeter. It's a piece of coat hanger wire. It's about 9 inches long. You would cut about 11 inches, bend one end, an inch on one end, and make a loop on the other end. You can see that it's very difficult to get in here to pull off the connector to the back of the voltmeter or on the other side the fuel gauge. What you do is you use this tool, you guide it up over the tongue of the connector, get it in there, and then pull, twist and pull, and the connector will pop out. I also had a problem with the wiring to the turn signals. One of the pins pulled out of the socket of the connector. Let's look at how I solved this problem. What I did was put a small zip tie around the 3 conductors so one of the wires and pins can't pull out of the connector if the pin isn't firmly seated. The wires to the turn signals are fairly long, but not quite long enough to set the fairing down on the ground while you disconnect the connectors. I made a contraption to hold up the fairing while I disconnect the wiring to the turn signals. Let's look at this contraption. Here's a contraption I made to help hold up the outer fairing while I disconnect the wires to the switch to the signals. I took a couple of large paper clips, cut them in half, and then bent a loop to hold a couple of rubber bands to hold them together. And here they are in action. I put one in through this hole, bring the fairing down, just hook it wherever I can, do the same on the other side, and then I can get to the connectors to disconnect the turn signals. Finally, here's a big time-saving tip. Make a list of each of the connections on the wiring harness, and when you put the bike back together, check off each connection that you make. This will save you time from having to take the fairing back off to plug in the headlight or the turn signals. I hope you liked this video, and that you'll leave a comment about the tools I made to help working under the outer fairing. I'll see you in the next video.